Amazon rainforest stretches across 9 nations like a living secret, over 2 million square miles of dense, suffocating green. A place where the canopy is so thick that sunlight becomes a memory on the forest floor. For generations, we believed we understood this place. We called it pristine. Untouched, a wilderness that had always been wild. But beneath the endless trees, there are discoveries that don't just challenge what we know about the Amazon. They challenge what we know about the Earth itself, about human civilization, about the thin line between permanence and erasure. What makes these discoveries truly unsettling is not what they reveal. It is what they suggest is still hidden, still waiting beneath layers of soil and centuries of silence. Today, we're moving through 7 discoveries that have forced scientists to rewrite history. And as we descend through this countdown, the discoveries don't just become stranger. They become darker, more dangerous, and far closer to the present than anyone wants to admit. There are phenomena in the Amazon that violate the basic rules we thought governed this planet, and the first one flows through the Peruvian jungle like an open wound. Number 7. The river that boils without fire. There are places in the Amazon where geology seems to break its own rules, where the Earth does things it shouldn't be capable of doing. And one of the most disturbing examples cuts through the Peruvian jungle for over 4 miles. The Shanay-Timpishka, a river that boils. Water temperatures that reach 95 to 100 degrees Celsius, that is 212 degrees Fahrenheit. Hot enough to cook flesh in seconds, the sound is constant. A low, rumbling bubble that never stops. Steam rises in clouds, so thick they shroud the surrounding forest in permanent fog. When animals fall in, their deaths are almost instant. Small mammals, snakes, birds that lose their way in the mist. Locals have found larger creatures floating downstream, their bodies cooked from the inside out. For years, scientists dismissed reports of this river as folklore. Boiling rivers exist near active volcanoes. You need magma close to the surface, superheated rock just below the ground. But the nearest volcano to the Shanay-Timpishka is over 450 miles away. There should be no heat source. No explanation for why this much water stays this hot for this long. And yet, it boils. Geothermal scientist Andrés Russo spent years studying the site, working with local shamans who have guarded it for generations. To them, the river is not a geological curiosity. It is a living entity, born from Yakamama, the mother of waters. A giant serpent spirit that breathes heat into the earth. They speak of it with reverence and fear, as if it has a will of its own. Russo's research suggests the river is fed by a massive fault system deep in the Earth's crust. Rainwater seeps down through cracks in the rock, heated by geothermal energy far below, then forced back up at enormous pressure and temperature. But the scale required to produce this much boiling water in a non-volcanic zone is unlike anything documented elsewhere. The exact mechanism remains unclear. What makes this discovery unsettling is not just the danger, it is what it represents. We assume we understand where heat comes from on this planet, where it can exist, where it cannot. But here, in one of the most remote parts of the Amazon, those assumptions fail. There is another detail that lingers. The river's temperature fluctuates. Sometimes it is merely scalding. Other times, it reaches full boiling point, and no one knows why. No one can predict when it will be safe to approach and when it will be lethal. The boiling river exists like a warning we haven't learned to read yet, a reminder that the Earth still holds phenomena we cannot predict. And if this exists in a place we've studied, what else might be hidden in places we haven't? But the river is not the only thing in the Amazon that defies explanation. Beneath the trees, hidden under centuries of growth, there are structures that shouldn't exist. Their discovery has forced us to confront a truth we spent over a century denying. The Amazon was never empty, and what lived here was far larger than we imagined. Number 6. the cities beneath the canopy for over a century. One idea dominated our understanding of the Amazon. The jungle was too hostile, the soil too poor, the environment too unforgiving to support large populations. Anthropologists believe that only small, nomadic tribes could survive here, that any attempt to build permanent settlements would be swallowed by the forest within a generation. This was not theory, it was doctrine. Textbooks taught it, experts repeated it, and for decades, we looked at the Amazon and saw exactly what we expected to see. Nothing. Then, in the early 2000s, a technology called LiDAR was mounted onto aircraft and aimed at the jungle canopy. LiDAR fires millions of laser pulses at the ground. The lasers pass through gaps in the foliage and bounce back, creating a detailed three-dimensional map of whatever lies beneath. For the first time in history, we could see through the trees, and what we saw was impossible. Beneath the endless green, hidden under vines and soil and centuries of decay, were cities, not small villages. Cities, networks of them, sprawling across hundreds of square miles, roads connecting them in perfectly straight lines. Earthen pyramids rising over 70 feet high, reservoirs, canals, ceremonial centers, all hidden in plain sight. In 2018, a study in Bolivia revealed the remains of the Casarabe culture, a society that thrived between 500 and 1400 AD. The scans showed vast interconnected networks of settlements, raised causeways stretched for miles, linking population centers that housed thousands of people. These weren't primitive camps, they were engineered landscapes, urban planning on a scale that rivaled ancient civilizations in the Old World. Then came discoveries in Ecuador. The Upano Valley, once thought uninhabited, revealed a network of garden cities covering over 116 square miles. Agricultural terraces carved into hillsides, platforms for homes. Roads wide enough for processions. Water management systems that controlled rivers and redirected seasonal floods. This was not survival. This was mastery. And every year, new sites emerge from the jungle, each one larger and more complex than the last. The terror of this discovery is not just in what these cities were. It is in what they tell us about what we didn't know. For 500 years, explorers, colonizers, and scientists explored through the Amazon and saw wilderness. They were walking through ruins, the jungle. Each is a daze. It is not virgin forest. It is a graveyard. But here is where the discovery becomes truly disturbing. These cities weren't just abandoned, they were erased. So completely erased that we forgot they ever existed. The people who built them, who lived in them, who farmed the land and raised families and constructed monuments, they vanished. Which raises a question no one wants to ask. If entire civilizations can be swallowed by the jungle and forgotten, what else has been lost? How many other societies rose and fell in the Amazon without leaving a trace we could recognize? The discovery of these cities is not just about the past. It is a glimpse into a process that is still happening. The Amazon doesn't preserve, it consumes, and it has endless patience. But there is another category of ruins hidden in the jungle. These ones are more recent, and that makes them more terrifying, because these aren't the remains of ancient cultures lost to time. These are the remnants of empires we remember, empires that believed they were permanent. Number 5. The forts that vanished in 200 years. Colonial powers didn't just explore the Amazon, they tried to conquer it. In the 17th and 18th centuries, Spanish and Portuguese forces pushed deep into the jungle, establishing forts, missions, and trading outposts. These weren't temporary camps. They were built with stone and steel, designed to last, meant to serve as permanent anchors of European control in the heart of the rainforest. But the Amazon doesn't recognize conquest. For over 2 centuries, historians knew these outposts existed. They appeared on old maps. They were mentioned in colonial records. Letters described the construction of fortifications, the brutal use of enslaved African and indigenous labor to extract rubber, gold, and timber. These places were real. They had names, coordinates, and then slowly, they disappeared. Not destroyed by war, not burned by rebellion, they simply faded. The jungle moved in. Vines crept over stone walls, trees grew through plazas, soil buried the streets, and within a few generations, the outposts were gone, completely erased from the physical world. They existed only in archives, footnotes in history books, ghost stories told by cartographers. That is, until LiDAR found them again. Starting in the 2010s, the same technology that revealed ancient cities began uncovering colonial ruins. In regions of Brazil and Peru, scans revealed the unmistakable geometric patterns of European construction. Stone foundations, defensive walls, the outlines of barracks and storehouses, all buried under layers of vegetation. Some of these structures were less than 250 years old. Think about that timeline. 250 years, not 2,000, not 10,000. In the span between the American Revolution and today, the jungle erased fortresses built by one of the most powerful empires in human history. These weren't villages made of wood and thatch. These were stone structures, built to endure, and the Amazon consumed them as if they were never there. What makes this discovery chilling is the speed. We like to think erasure takes millennia, that it requires ice ages or tectonic shifts. But here, it happens in centuries, sometimes less. The jungle doesn't need a cataclysm to erase human presence. It just needs time. There is something deeply unsettling about standing in front of a LiDAR scan and seeing the outline of a colonial fort that no living person has ever seen with their own eyes. It existed. People lived there. They worked. They suffered. They built walls and thought those walls would stand forever. And now, without laser technology, you could walk directly over the ruins and never know they were beneath your feet. The Amazon is not a neutral landscape. It is an active force. It doesn't just grow over things. It dismantles them, brick by brick, stone by stone. And when it is done, there is nothing left but the faintest geometric shadow, invisible to the naked eye. The colonial outposts are gone, but the jungle that erased them is still there, still growing, still consuming. And it raises an uncomfortable question about what is happening right now in places we think are permanent, that future archaeologists will have to rediscover with tools we haven't invented yet. But not all of the Amazon's horrors are buried in the past. Some are happening right now, and they're not hidden by centuries of growth. They're visible from space, and what they reveal is not just destruction. It is something far more personal. Number 4. The invasion you can see from orbit. There is a sound in the Amazon that doesn't belong there. The roar of chainsaws, the grinding of heavy machinery, the crash of ancient trees hitting the forest floor. This is not the slow, patient consumption of the jungle reclaiming human structures. This is something faster, louder, and far more deliberate. Illegal logging. Satellite images updated in real time show a pattern that is impossible to ignore. New roads appear overnight. Thin lines carved into the green, pushing deeper into protected areas, into indigenous territories, into parts of the forest that were, until very recently, untouched. These roads are arteries, and they pump destruction into the heart of the Amazon at an industrial scale. Recent studies show that over 90% of deforestation in the Brazilian Amazon is illegal. No permits, no oversight. Just organized criminal networks with chainsaws, bulldozers, and buyers waiting on the other side of the world. They're not selective. They don't take one tree and leave the rest. For every valuable hardwood extracted, mahogany, cedar, ipefe, dozens of other trees are destroyed. Studies estimate that for every single commercial tree removed, 27 others are damaged or killed. Hundreds of square meters of canopy are ripped open. The forest doesn't just lose a tree, it loses a piece of its structure. Its ability to regulate temperature, to hold moisture, to sustain life. The scale is staggering. In 2022 alone, the Amazon lost an area of forest larger than the state of Connecticut. That is not over decades, that is 1 year. And the pace is accelerating. But the ecological catastrophe is only part of the terror. The other part is human. the Amazon is home to over 400 indigenous groups. Some have chosen contact with the outside world. Others have not. These are the uncontacted tribes, groups that have lived in voluntary isolation for centuries, maintaining ways of life that predate modern civilization. And now, the logging roads are reaching them. For an uncontacted tribe, the sound of a chainsaw is an apocalypse. These are people with no immunity to common diseases, no understanding of the machinery tearing through their forest, no defense against the violence that often follows. Loggers don't ask permission, and when they encounter resistance, the results are brutal. In recent years, reports have surfaced of indigenous people being killed for defending their land, of entire communities being forced to flee deeper into the jungle, only to find that the destruction is following them. This is not ancient history. This is happening now. While you are reading this, somewhere in the Amazon, a chainsaw is cutting through a tree that has been standing for 300 years. And the people who have lived beside that tree, who have known it as part of their world, are powerless to stop it. The most terrifying part is the feeling of inevitability. We can track the deforestation in real time. We can see the roads spreading like cracks in glass. Environmental organizations publish reports. Governments pass laws. And yet the destruction continues. Because the money is too good. The forest is too big. The enforcement is too weak. There is a term used by conservationists. Tipping point. The idea that if the Amazon loses too much of its forest cover, it will no longer be able to sustain itself. The rainfall will decrease, the trees will die, and the jungle will transform into a savanna, a dry, open landscape that can never be restored. Some scientists believe we're already close to that threshold, that we might have 10 years, maybe 20, before the Amazon crosses a line from which it cannot return. And if that happens, it won't just be the Amazon that suffers. The rainforest plays a critical role in regulating the planet's climate. It absorbs billions of tons of carbon dioxide. Lose the Amazon, and the climate crisis accelerates beyond anything we've seen so far. But right now, in the remote reaches of the jungle, none of that matters to the crews with chainsaws. They're not thinking about tipping points. They're thinking about profit. And the forest is falling. The sound of machinery is a modern horror, but there are older sounds in that jungle, sounds that don't come from machines, sounds that exist in the space between documentation and denial, and what those sounds might represent changes everything we thought we knew about what lives in the Amazon. Up to this point, the discoveries have felt distant, ancient ruins, colonial ghosts, even the logging, as devastating as it is, feels like something happening in a place most of us will never see. But from here on, the story takes a different turn, because the next discoveries aren't just about what is hidden in the Amazon. They're about what is still there, still alive, and still watching. Number 3. The things that should not exist. The Amazon is the most biodiverse place on Earth. Over 400 billion individual trees, tens of thousands of plant species, millions of insect species. So many forms of life that scientists estimate we've only catalogued about 10% of what is actually there. With that much biodiversity, it is easy to assume that everything in the Amazon can be explained, that every strange creature, every unusual sighting, is just a known animal seen from a different angle. But there are stories in the Amazon that don't fit. Stories that have been told for generations by indigenous tribes, by explorers, by scientists who went into the jungle looking for one thing and came back describing something else. And the most unsettling part is that these stories don't fade with time. They persist. They accumulate, and they all describe the same things. Creatures that shouldn't exist. In the 1920s, British explorer Percy Fawcett led multiple expeditions into the Amazon searching for a lost city. Fawcett never found his city. He vanished in 1925, somewhere deep in the Mato Grosso region, and was never seen again. But the journals he sent back before his disappearance contained more than maps and theories. They contained descriptions of something his guides called the Maricoxi. According to Fawcett's accounts, the Maricoxi were large bipedal creatures covered in reddish-brown hair. They walked upright like humans, but were much taller, with ape-like features. Fawcett described an encounter where his expedition came across a group of these beings. They didn't attack, but they made it clear that the expedition was not welcome. Fawcett's indigenous guides were terrified. To them, the Maricoxi were not legend. They were a known and feared part of the jungle. Mainstream science dismisses the Maricoxi as misidentification. Perhaps a large spider monkey. Perhaps a local legend mistaken for reality. But the Amazon is vast, and vast places have a way of hiding things. If an unknown primate species existed in the deep forest, avoiding human contact, how would we know? LiDAR can see through trees, but it can't identify movement. It can't tell you what is alive. The Maricoxi is not the only cryptid reported in the Amazon. There is the Mapinguari, a creature described by multiple indigenous groups across different regions. Accounts are remarkably consistent. A giant hair-covered beast standing upright with long claws and an unbearable stench. Some descriptions give it a single eye. Others describe a mouth in the center of its torso. It is said to emit a roar that can be heard for miles, a sound so deep and guttural that it causes animals to flee and people to freeze in terror. The Mapinguari has been reported for centuries, but in the 1990s reports began to increase. Loggers and settlers pushing deeper into the forest claim to have encountered something matching the descriptions. Trees stripped of bark at heights no known animal could reach, massive footprints. The smell of rotten decay lingering in clearings where nothing had died. Some scientists have speculated that the Mapinguari legend might be a cultural memory of the giant ground sloth, a massive prehistoric creature that lived in South America until around 10,000 years ago. Called a population have survived in the Amazon's most remote regions. It seems unlikely, but unlikely is not the same as impossible. And then there are the water cryptids. The Amazon's rivers are home to known terrors: piranhas, caimans, electric eels, stingrays. But the locals speak of something worse: anacondas that grow far beyond the documented maximum length. While the largest confirmed green anaconda measured around 27 feet, indigenous accounts describe serpents 50, 80, even 100 feet long, coiled around submerged trees, dragging full-grown caimans beneath the surface. Some biologists believe these accounts are exaggerations, but others point out that the Amazon's rivers are murky, deep, and largely unexplored. How would we know if something larger was down there? There is also the candiru, a parasitic catfish that has earned a terrifying reputation. The species is real, confirmed, but the behavior attributed to it borders on nightmare. Local legend and some reported cases claim the candiru can swim up a stream of urine and lodge itself inside the urethra of a swimmer. Once inside, the fish extends spines, making removal excruciating and nearly impossible without surgery. Whether this behavior actually occurs is debated, but the fear is real. And in the Amazon, fear has a way of outlasting facts. What makes these cryptid reports so unsettling is not whether they're real. It is that the Amazon is still a place where we genuinely don't know. We've mapped the surface of Mars with more detail than we've mapped the Amazon floor. There are regions of the jungle where no scientist has ever set foot, where the only humans to ever walk there are tribes who don't document their findings. Number 2, the silence after the cities we've already talked about, the cities. The vast, sophisticated urban networks hidden beneath the canopy, the roads and pyramids and reservoirs. But there is a second discovery buried within that first one. A discovery that is far more chilling. The people who built those cities are gone. Not just gone in the sense that they moved somewhere else, gone in the sense that entire populations numbering in the millions collapsed, vanished, left behind only the structures that the jungle is now slowly erasing. And the more we learn about these civilizations, the more disturbing their disappearance becomes. Let's start with what we know. The pre-Columbian societies of the Amazon were not small or primitive. The Casarabe culture in Bolivia, the Upano cities in Ecuador, the settlements along the Xingu River in Brazil. These were complex, organized civilizations. they built on a scale that required thousands of laborers. They developed agricultural techniques so advanced that they created their own soil, terra preta, Amazonian dark earth. This is not natural soil. It is a human invention, created by mixing charcoal, bone, compost, and organic waste into the naturally poor Amazonian earth. The result is a black, carbon-rich soil that remains fertile to this day, over 1,000 years after it was made. Creating terra preta wasn't a quick process. It took generations, layer upon layer, built up over centuries. It is one of the most sophisticated examples of environmental engineering in human history. And it worked. The Amazon's natural soil is notoriously poor. Nutrients are locked in the trees, not the ground, but terra preta changed that. It allowed these societies to sustain large populations in a place where large populations shouldn't have been possible. They didn't just survive in the Amazon, they thrived. For over 1,000 years, these civilizations flourished. And then, sometime around the 15th and 16th centuries, they began to collapse. The cities were abandoned. The fields went unplanted. The roads fell into disuse. And within a few generations, the jungle had swallowed everything. So what happened? The first theory is climate change. Not modern climate change, ancient climate change. Analysis of sediment cores from Amazonian lakes shows evidence of severe, prolonged droughts around the time these societies began to decline, for a civilization built on water management, controlling rivers and seasonal floods to sustain agriculture. A major drought would have been catastrophic. Crops would have failed, reservoirs would have dried up, and without food, the social structure would have collapsed. But drought alone doesn't explain the totality of the collapse, because many of these sites show signs of violence. Defensive walls reinforced at the last minute. Burn layers in the archaeological record, mass graves. It is possible that as resources dwindled, the city-states turned on each other. War isn't unusual in human history, but war combined with environmental collapse creates a feedback loop. Armies destroy fields, refugees flee, systems break down, and recovery becomes impossible. And then came the third blow, the one that finished what the drought and the wars had started: disease. When Europeans arrived in the Amazon in the early 1500s, they didn't come alone. They brought smallpox, measles, influenza, typhus. Diseases that had ravaged Europe, but to which Europeans had developed some immunity. The indigenous populations of the Americas had no such immunity. These diseases spread faster than the Europeans themselves. They moved along trade routes, river networks, from village to village, from city to city, and they killed on a scale that is almost incomprehensible. Some estimates suggest that up to 90% of the indigenous population of the Americas died within the first century of contact. 90%. Imagine a city of 10,000 people reduced to 1,000. Imagine that happening everywhere, all at once. This wasn't just death. This was apocalypse. The Spanish and Portuguese explorers who penetrated the Amazon in the 1540s described large, prosperous settlements, towns with thousands of inhabitants. But when other expeditions followed the same routes just a few decades later, they found silence. The settlements were gone, the people were dead or scattered, and the jungle was already reclaiming the ruins. By the time modern scientists began studying the Amazon in the 20th century, the memory of those cities had faded. The survivors had integrated into smaller groups or fled to more remote areas. The oral traditions that remembered the cities were fragmented, and the physical evidence was buried under centuries of vegetation. What makes this discovery so terrifying is not just the scale of the loss. It is the speed. A thriving civilization, millions of people, erased in less than 100 years. And so completely erased that we forgot they ever existed. This is not ANSI. Number 1. The forest. That isn't a forest. This is the discovery that changes everything. The one that forces us to reconsider not just the Amazon, but our entire concept of wilderness. It is the realization that the Amazon rainforest, the place we've held up as the ultimate example of untouched nature, is not natural at all. It is a garden, and we're living in the ruins. For centuries, The story was simple. The Amazon was a primordial wilderness, a place where nature reigned supreme and humanity was an insignificant presence. But every discovery we've discussed, the lost cities, the engineered soil, the managed landscapes, points to the opposite conclusion. The Amazon wasn't shaped by nature alone. It was shaped by people, millions of them, over thousands of years. Let's start with the soil. Terra preta isn't just found in a few isolated spots. It is scattered across the entire Amazon basin, thousands of sites covering thousands of square miles. That is not a few gardens. That is an entire region transformed. The people who created Terra preta weren't just farming, they were fundamentally altering the landscape, creating conditions for agriculture where none should have existed, and they sustained this system for over 2,000 years. But it goes deeper. Recent research has shown that the distribution of tree species in the Amazon is not random. For years, botanists assumed that the concentration of certain useful plants, Brazil nuts, cacao, palms, was the result of natural dispersion. But the pattern is too specific, too organized. These useful species are clustered around areas where Terra preta is found, around the sites of ancient settlements, which suggests something extraordinary. The forest itself was planted, not all of it, but significant portions. The pre-Columbian inhabitants of the Amazon didn't just farm. They cultivated the forest. They encouraged the growth of species they found useful. They cleared areas for agriculture and allowed others to grow wild. They managed the jungle the way a gardener manages a park. And they did this on a scale so large that it shaped the genetic distribution of plants across millions of square miles. What we see today, the dense, tangled, wild Amazon, is not the forest's natural state. It is what happens when a managed system collapses and runs wild for 500 years. The Amazon isn't pristine, it is overgrown. This discovery fundamentally changes how we think about nature. We've been trained to see wilderness as the absence of human influence, a place where people haven't interfered. But in the Amazon, that is impossible, because human influence is everywhere. In the soil, in the trees, in the shape of the land itself. The Amazon isn't nature versus humanity, it is nature after humanity. The forest we see today is a monument to collapse, a living gravestone for a civilization that has been almost completely forgotten. And what makes this so deeply unsettling is the realization of how much knowledge was lost. The people who managed the Amazon understood something we don't. They knew how to sustain millions of people in one of the most challenging environments on Earth without destroying it. They didn't mine the forest, they cultivated it. They didn't conquer nature, they cooperated with it. And that knowledge, developed over millennia, died with them. Today, we're cutting down the Amazon at a rate that would have horrified the people who built it. We treat it as an obstacle, a resource to be extracted, and we're doing it with the assumption that it will grow back, that nature is resilient. But the Amazon isn't resilient in the way we think. It is not a self-sustaining system that will bounce back no matter what we do. It is a carefully balanced creation that depended on the people who managed it. And now those people are gone. The system is running on momentum, and momentum always runs out. There is a haunting irony in all of this. For 500 years, we looked at the Amazon and saw a wilderness. We used that image to justify our treatment of it. It is just jungle. It doesn't belong to anyone. It is not being used. But we were wrong. It did belong to someone. It was being used. We just didn't recognize it. We were looking at a garden and calling it wild, looking at the ruins of a civilization and calling it empty. And now, as we finally begin to understand what the Amazon really is, we're destroying it faster than ever. The terror of this discovery is existential. It is the realization that an entire world can end, that millions of people can vanish, that their knowledge can be lost, that their monuments can be erased, and that the rest of humanity can walk through the ruins without even knowing they're there. The Amazon is not a warning from the distant past. It is a mirror. Because if it happened to them despite everything they built, everything they knew, everything they achieved, It can happen to us, and maybe in some way, it already is. From rivers that boil without fire to civilizations erased so completely we forgot they existed, the Amazon holds more than mysteries. It holds a record of what happens when societies collapse, when knowledge is lost, when the systems we depend on break down. These discoveries aren't just about the past. They're about the present, about the invisible line between a thriving world and a forgotten one, about how quickly that line can be crossed, and about how, if we're not careful, we might cross it ourselves without realizing until it is too late. The Amazon is still revealing its secrets. Every year, LiDAR uncovers new sites, new roads, new evidence of the world that was, but the jungle is patient, and there are still places the lasers haven't reached. Still sections of forest so remote, so dense, that no technology has pierced them. What is waiting there, we don't yet know. But the Amazon has taught us one thing. The answers are never comfortable, and the deeper we look, the darker they become. This discovery was not the end, and what remains hidden may be far worse.